What do Lightsworns, Sky Strikers, Burning Abyss, and Cloudians all have in common? Well, if you've been playing the game long enough, you probably already know that all of those decks are decks that were able to top in different formats after being hit on the ban list multiple times, and were able to top for years, literal years, where these decks are some of the best strategies in the game. Decks like Cloudians and Lightsworns have been around for over 10 years, which is really impressive because that's one of the things that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! So great. We don't have a set rotation, which means that older strategies can still be competitive. Now, in the case of Lightsworns and Cloudians, and sort of Burning Abyss and Sky Circus as well, sometimes these decks are top meta strategies, and then in next format they're like a good rogue strategy, but they're always sort of around in the metagame. Lightsworns and Cloudians, though, if you haven't been playing that long, you might not remember this, but these strategies were really, really good right up until like 2017, 2018, and we're seeing competitive play at all sorts of tournaments. Recently, not so much, but in today's video, I want to focus on Cloudians, one of my favorite archetypes, and I want to talk about what made this deck so deadly and why it sort of demolished tournaments for years, because a lot of people might not know the history behind this very interesting strategy. First off, let's start with the basics. There are 4 level 4 Cloudian monsters that all have very similar utility effects. All of these cards cannot be destroyed by battle, and if they're in face-up defense position, you destroy them. That's perfectly fine though, because usually you want to normal summon them, not set them. When they're normal summoned, they gain fog counters for every single Cloudian monster on the field. This is really powerful because in the case of Acid Cloud and Stratus, you can remove 2 fog counters to either destroy a spell or trap card or a monster card. These effects are not once per turn, which is ridiculously overpowered because it means that you could just destroy entire fields if you had enough Cloudians on the board. Atlas is another one of those level 4 monsters. It's very powerful, requires you to remove 3 fog counters, but it discards a random card out of your opponent's hand. You've probably heard of things like Wind Up Hunter ripping all the cards out of your opponent's hand, or maybe Trishula banishing all those cards, but for a while, Cloudian Atlas was just as powerful, and keep in mind, when this card was released way back in Gladiator's Assault, there were not hand traps to combat the effect, which was a huge issue for the format. It sets up an early powerful board of these monsters that your opponent can't get rid of, and then because they can't get rid of them, you can put more fog counters when you get your normal summons going, and you can just decimate their entire board. Perhaps where it gets really broken though is Cloudian Turbulence. This is the #1 reason that Cloudians have been able to dominate so many different metagames. This card is insanely overpowered, so keep in mind, once again, not a once per turn effect, and this one's effect only has you remove 1 fog counter, which is insane by the way, because it means if you normal summon this card and control no other Cloudians, you're still going to be able to use this effect. Now what does it do? Well, when you remove that 1 fog counter, you get to special summon a Cloudian Smoke Ball from your deck or either player's graveyard. That either player's graveyard was super crucial by the way, because it meant in the mirror match you could not go through your own resources and actually steal your opponent's, and that's really, really good. Now Cloudian Smoke Ball, it's not very powerful by itself, or maybe it doesn't look that way. It is just a level 1 vanilla monster, but the fact that you can continuously special summon these with Cloudian Turbulence turn after turn after turn is really, really impactful. When this deck was first popular, you saw a lot of people using the Smoke Ball for tribute summons, and that's perfectly fine, but where it really started to get just completely unfair was with the release of synchro summons, and especially the tuner monster Fishborg Blaster. While you control a level 3 or lower water monster, you can discard 1 card to special summon Fishborg Blaster right from your graveyard. All the Cloudians are water monsters, so you could bring back Fishborg Blaster, tune it with Smoke Ball to make Formula Synchron, draw a card, keep bringing back the Fishborg Blaster, and oftentimes summon at least 1 copy of Shooting Quasar Dragon. This deck got even better with the release of Xyz monsters, because you got a lot of free level 4 monsters and this level 1 monster, which can make some pretty powerful rank 1s, and with the release of Link monsters, it just got even crazier. You can do so many nutty things with all these free special summons. And there are some things to note with this strategy. First off, you have Spirit Barrier, and this is one of the cards that, oh man, if you didn't play back in the day, you might not know how overpowered this was, but while Spirit Barrier is face up on the field and you control a monster card, you take no battle damage, which normally, not very good, but in Cloudians, it was obscenely overpowered because while you control the Cloudians, they can't be destroyed by battle, and while you control the Spirit Barrier, you take no damage. In many cases, you would just have 1 or 2 Cloudian face up on the field, and you would flip that Spirit Barrier, and you would simply deck your opponent out. If you think about modern Yu-Gi-Oh, you see a lot of people playing like 1 form of back row removal in their deck, just in case their opponent has has a Mystic Mine, well, that was the same thing for years with Spirit Barrier. You oftentimes would look at deck profiles from people that had like one MST or one Heavy Storm, and they would claim the reason for those cards being necessary is exactly to beat the Cloudian matchup and get rid of that Spirit Barrier, so they didn't get decked out. For the longest time, Cloudian Nimbus Man was actually the big finisher of this strategy. That kind of went away once Link monsters came out and this deck was doing more crazy things like extra linking the opponent, but for a while, for like a long time, this was like the big card that you wanted to end on and OTK your opponent. Even though Nimbus Man is level 5, you're allowed to tribute any number of water monsters for its tribute summon. You want to tribute as many as possible, by the way, because when this card is tribute summoned, you place one fog counter on it for each water monster you tributed, and then it gains 500 attack for each fog counter on the field. Oftentimes, you would see games decided by who had the bigger Nimbus Man. You frequently saw it up to 6,000 attack, 7,000 attack, and sometimes even over 8,000. This card was extremely oppressive for a long time, especially before we had synchro summons, but even after we got synchro summons and you were summoning Shooting Quasar Dragon, you almost always had your one copy of Nimbus Man just in case you needed it. Now for some other fog counter cards, we need to look at cards like Cloudian Ghost Fog as well as Cloudian Squall. Cloudian Squall is more of an over time situation. It places fog counters on every face-up monster, and this is one of the ways that you can keep putting fog counters back on your cards like Atlas and Stratus and Turbulence over the course of several turns. With a modern lens, it might seem really slow to wait for Cloudian Squall to place a bunch of fog counters on the field, but keep in mind that you often had that Spirit Barrier lock going, so it's not like your opponent could really do anything anyway. Cloudian Ghost Fog would place a whole bunch of fog counters on the field at one time. When it's destroyed by battle, you get to place as many fog counters on face-up monsters equal to the level of the monster that destroyed it. So oftentimes you'd be crashing it into like a level 4 monster or perhaps even level 5 or level 6. This would get a lot of fog counters out at one time. Fog control was kind of played for a similar reason, but oftentimes was considered a suboptimal choice. But it is worth mentioning that Ghost Fog would very frequently place exactly 4 counters on cards, and you don't have to place the fog counters on your own cards. That oftentimes is beneficial, but if you place the fog counters on your opponent's monster, you could use Diamond Dust Cyclone, a card that many players called to be banned for years. This is a quick play spell card that says, select one monster with 4 or more fog counters, destroy it, and then draw 1 card for every 4 fog counters that were on it. This card is very overpowered. It didn't even have to be a quick play spell card, and it probably still would have been played, but the fact that, especially considering the time period when this card was released, the fact that this thing was a quick play spell card just really put it over the top and was a staple 3 of in every Cloudian strategy. What was really interesting, and by the way, many players at the time disagreed with this, but even after Cloudians were dominating the metagame from the end of 2007 through early 2008, Konami decided to give them more support. Cloudian Storm Dragon, a very powerful level 4 monster. This thing says this card cannot be normal summon or set. This card can only be special summoned by removing from play 1 Cloudian monster from your graveyard. This card cannot be destroyed by battle. If this card is in face-up defense position, destroy it. And then finally, the most important part, once per turn, you can place 1 fog counter on 1 monster on the field. I can't even tell you how overpowered this card was. I mean, so many players called for this card to be banned. We already saw people begging Konami to ban Diamond Dust Cyclone, and this card made it even better. Placing 1 fog counter for free, I might add, is completely ridiculous, especially when you keep in mind that you can summon multiple copies of this card per turn and there's no once per turn restrictions. Cloudian Storm Dragon really made this deck and solidified it as a top tier strategy for many years to come, and I'm still a little bit surprised looking back on it, very similar to looking back on cards like Dimension Fusion and something along those lines, that Konami really did decide to print Cloudian Storm Dragon before they hit any of the other overpowered Cloudian cards. I also want to talk about some of the times that Cloudian has really impacted the Yu-Gi-Oh! Metagame, or especially the secondary market throughout history. So, for example, Cloudian Poison Cloud is a level 3 Fiend monster, whereas most of the other Cloudians are fairy monsters, and this is the main reason that Tour Guide from the Underworld back in 2012 was over $150, even peaking at $200. Adding Tour Guide of the Underworld into your already insanely powerful Cloudian deck was just completely unfair. Many players wished that Cloudian Poison Cloud would be the card that made it on the ban list, but unfortunately Konami hit Tour Guide instead. The modern equivalent, by the way, of Tour Guide getting hit instead of Cloudian Poison Cloud would be like when Assault Core got hit instead of Firewall Dragon. One of the cards is still very clearly the more powerful ones, but Konami decides to hit the less powerful one just for some strange reason. One of the things that that did help Cloudians stay relevant over the years is simply how versatile they've been against other meta strategies. For example, if you think back to when Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon was one of the best cards in the game, so that would be like 2016 through 2017, or early 2017 I should say, one of the most popular combos was summoning that Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon and using block attack on an opposing monster. Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon does double piercing damage, which is really overpowered, but Cloudians have a lot of built-in ways to deal with Chaos Max Dragon, which was super relevant for several formats. For example, if you control Spirit Barrier, they basically can't do anything, but even if they do out the Spirit Barrier, remember that the Cloudians have a built-in destruction effect that happens when they're switched to defense mode. Now, if your opponent tries to switch one of your guys to defense mode with block attack, it simply blows up to prevent you from taking double piercing damage. I don't know if Konami had the foresight when they originally made the Cloudian monsters to realize that 10 plus years later they would need this protection effect, but it really came in handy when Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon was at the top tables of almost every single event for several formats. 2017 was really the last year that we saw Cloudians at the top tables very consistently. I mean, you still see them every now and again, but 2018 was really rough for them. Yes, they could perform pretty crazy extra linking combos that just required 2 or 3 cards, but they really couldn't compete with like Goki or Sky Strikers or Trickstars, especially. Banishing that Storm Dragon was huge. However, Konami in 2019 decided to give them a little bit more support, and that is Cloudian Aerosol, which says you can discard one Cloudian monster, then target one face-up monster on the field, place fog counters on that target equal to that monster's level. Usually it'll be 4, at least in most cases, but sometimes it'll be even more than that if you discard Nimbus Man, which is pretty cool. You can banish this card and one Cloudian monster in your graveyard, especially summon one Cloudian monster from your deck. You can only use one Cloudian Aerosol effect per turn and only once that turn. Now this card did make an impact. Suddenly we saw Cloudians topping at regionals especially, but as far as bigger events go, like YCSs or especially WCQs, Cloudians at this point were pretty much completely out of the metagame, which is a real shame. Much like Lightsworns, at this point most players just look at Cloudians as an older meta strategy that sometimes can get some regional tops, and I think that's perfectly fine. You know, it's still a very big fan favorite strategy for many players. A lot of players fondly remember hand looping with Atlas or summoning a million copies of Smokeball with Turbulence, but at this point those things just don't happen nearly as often. Anyway though, I hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video and a walk through Yu-Gi-Oh's rich history with a deck that was meta for a very long time. Oh, and by the way, on a completely unrelated note to today's discussion video, happy April Fool's Day. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.